I will tell you something.
Uh,
When I was in high school,
mm.
my history teacher was a man called Ward Mills,
Oh,
Okay, then
and
no more chit chat. It's 3 o'clock, and we are
I'll
going to
tell
the
you the story
bed.
later.
all
We'll
right.
hear the story later. So, greetings and salutations, everyone. I am delighted to be here on a Saturday afternoon on UN World Social Justice Day. Who knew? I didn't know till I started trying to figure out what day should I have an event in June. I mean, in February, I said, I want to do a Caribbean American Black History Month event. I said, oh my God, this is going to become my new day. So every February 20th, because I like to
Nice.
celebrate World Days, because I'm very much committed to create, helping us all understand we live on one planet and there's no plan B. There's no planet B. We got to kind of take care of this planet. And so taking care of the planet means taking better care of each other. And so social justice, I think, could obviously or is very linked to environmental justice, one of the issues that is creating the environmental degradation. And as you know, we have come through a very, I would say, rich tradition of protest in the last couple months on both sides of the aisle. As we can see, American protest is alive and well. And so I really thought it important that we pick this day in particular to hone in on Caribbean contributions to social justice. We're going to focus mostly on Caribbean social contributions here in the United States of America. But of course, because we're very migratory people, we might find ourselves talking about Panama or talking about Costa Rica or elsewhere, because some people actually who are from Panama and Costa Rica here in America came through parents from the Caribbean who were once in Costa Rica or Panama or Cuba even, and whose parents were very much part of the social justice movements of their era, especially in the UNIA days. So I'm very grateful that we're joined by our distinguished panel. I believe, unfortunately, two of our panelists were unable to make it, but we do have three of our distinguished panelists here. We are joined by Dr. Jeffrey Phillip, who is a professor and a Garvey student, scholar. He and I have been, over the years, been very engaged in the Garvey agenda. We're also joined by Amanda Thomas Johnson, who I believe is all the way in Senegal at the moment. Are you still there?
I'm actually in London. I'm in London
You're in
right now.
London now. He goes back. Oh, grateful. Dr. Carol Boyce Davis did make it. I'm so happy. I've been calling her frantically. So our other scholar is Dr. Carol Boyce Davis from Trinidad. I'm also a very long-standing friend and colleague, formerly president of the Caribbean Studies Association, but really a fine scholar writing a lot about diasporic
Yes.
matters. Amanda is a journalist. He's now in London, just written a book. You'll hear more of that. Barbara Bullard, who we just met, she's very engaged in the Shirley Chisholm Institute, also has her own book. I was very deliberate to pick people who have books, okay? Because it's very hard to sell your book. So hopefully after this, some of you will be curious enough to have
Musical.
make sure our cultural capital is supported by us. And not to be left behind is our erstwhile host, Donovan Longmore. He is host of the long-standing reggae program in Hartford, Reggae Voyage. He'll be taking us on this voyage today, and he's also a representative for the Jamaica Northeast Diaspora movement that is certainly making moves to ensure that we continue the tradition of social justice. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much. Welcome. We do intend to have a period for question and answers. So if we could ask everybody who is not speaking to mute their mics so that we don't have any noise. We are being streamed live on Carib Nation TV. If you're not in the home you're supposed to be and don't want to be recorded, you definitely want to take off your camera. In case, in Jamaica, say, in case your boopsies yard. Um, and just sit back, have fun. This is not an academic exercise. It's meant to be a community cafe. In fact, I'm going to start calling these things community cafes, learning cafes, because we have to learn a lot, nourish our minds a lot to strengthen us for the road ahead. We have some really serious work we got to do in the next 2 years. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Donovan Longmore to take the floor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, distinguished guest. My name is Donovan Longmore, and let me say, of course, good evening to each and every one. I see my good friend Maurice Lindsay is on the line from WTCC, and it's a delight to have you guys here. We're here to, of course, discuss everything that happens from our forefathers, mothers, those who have paved the way for us in terms of fighting with social justice here in America. Over the years, we realized that throughout history, Caribbeans have played a significant roles, and of course, in towards the role of social justice in this way of sports, media, arts, politics, business, film, music, entertainment, and so on. As you guys know, the month of June is dedicated as National Caribbean American Heritage Month. And this month is February, which we celebrate Black History Month and Reggae Music Month. So tonight, we're going to have, of course, some of the most brilliant minds talking about the issues, of course, and what people have done from the Caribbean perspective for social justice in the United States. So I think we have a poem to be read by someone to start it off.
So this is a poem. This is from a book that I've submitted, and it's in publication. So
Okay.
look for it next year. It's for Amy Jakes Garvey, a woman who has captured my heart. The train grumbled out of Baton Rouge as I tapped my heels against the wooden floor of the platform and waited for my escorts to ferry me to the sanctuary of their church. Rubbing my finger against the barrel of the gun you swore you'd never use, even after Tyler's bullet grazed your forehead. No gun for me. If I'm to be killed, then maybe it is my destiny. I was greeted by a host of nervous congregants who ushered me to the back of the waiting room and offered to pay for my return ticket. Sister, for your own protection, you best get back on the train, my driver advised, and a wave of chills racked my body, even more than the story he whispered about a sister who had been lynched the night before, how her tongue wagged to the side of her mouth, her breast heaved, and then a stream of yellow trickled down the back of her dress to the green below. But I am not the little Joan of Arc, as George Maguire likes to tease. I mounted the pulpit like those venerable pastors from my boarding school and preached a gospel of freedom. Comfort ye, my people. And when the voices from the Amen corner rose in a crescendo that spiraled up the rafters into the belfry, and over leaves of gumbo limbo dozing in the moonlight beside the murky waters of the bayou, and the sisters wailed, "Tell it, sister, tell it," I knew I wouldn't have to use my gun that night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. We do appreciate that right here. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about who we have on this call, some of the most brilliant minds that you can hear talking about social justice. We have Dr. Carol Boyce Davis. Dr. Davis, of course, is a scholar, and she's an author in Caribbean Spaces. She was born in Trinidad, and she teaches about Caribbean studies. We also have Barbara Bullard. Barbara is, of course, an author, producer, and released and become the story of two souls, and a phenomenal woman that's doing a lot of great things. We also have Amanda Thomas Jefferson. This young man, as you heard, is out of Canada, and he wrote the book, Africa, I should say, and he wrote a book, Becoming Kwame Ture. Very, very interesting book. If you haven't read it, you need to go and get you a copy. And of course, we have Dr. Claire Nelson, the futurist. She's always doing stuff here for us. And we're just here to make sure and welcome and invite everybody. Everybody else is there. We see Prescott Harris, Leon Willen, of course, Connie Lee, Veronica Headley is on the line, Patricia Ford Caesar is on the line, and of course we have Brianna Boone is on the line. So we do appreciate everyone for tuning in and for joining with us. We also have none other than the one and only Mr. Morris Lindsay from out of Springfield. Karen and Henry Place is here, and we got some other folks on the phone line. Leo and everybody else, thank you so much for joining and being a part of this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, throughout history, we realize that Caribbeans have played a major role in social justice here in the United States. But sometimes we have issues and we have problems that we have to solve. So here are some of the most brilliant minds in the world that's going to talk to us about what we need to do to make it better as we go forth. Black History Month, ladies and gentlemen, the first Black newspaper was, of course, the Freedom Journal, done by John Wasworm. And Marcus Garvey himself also started the Negro World newspaper. Please, any one of you, elaborate on the significance, Jeffrey Pable, of how these early pioneers have impacted social justice and the role of Black journalism in the United States. Jeffrey, you can go for this one.
Well, the first thing is with Garvey and the Negro World, one of the things that he did was to give a voice to the injustices that were plaguing African Americans. And one of the things that he joined in, and especially she's not a Caribbean, but her work at that time was very important. Ida B. Wells with her anti-lynching campaigns, and this spilled over into Garvey's campaigns. But the most important thing, which is why our books and our newspapers are so important, is that Black people got to see the news that affected them, the things that affected them directly. I'll give you an example. All week I've been watching MSNBC, but not a word about what is happening in Haiti. That's what Garvey did. Garvey turned the spotlight on us and told the stories of what was happening in the world that gave us context about how these things affected us and effectively mobilized. And remember, he had a circulation of over 200 million. The Negro World had a circulation of over 200 million. Without Twitter, without Facebook, without Instagram, all of this was spread by word of mouth. And this was all through Garvey's tireless efforts. But I would also mention that the early stages of the Negro World was pioneered by none other than Amy Ashwood Garvey, and then later, the woman who I, as Rastafari would say, livicated the poem to, Amy Jakes Garvey, who played, there would be no Marcus Garvey without Amy Jakes Garvey.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. We do appreciate that, and a lot of great knowledge that was dropped there for you, ladies and gentlemen. In case you're just tuning in, we are here to discuss, of course, the struggle we have and the thing for Black History Month. It's called social justice and how Caribbeans have contributed here in the United States. Next question going on. Besides Marcus Garvey, the Pan-African movement, which was born in the early 20th century, saw many West Indians leading the charge to secure global economic advancement and equal opportunities within the societies of which they migrated: England, USA, Panama, Costa Rica, and many more. Dr. Carol Davis, tell us about some of the work of the women of that era that we have not heard about.
Hi, a pleasure being with you and listening to Jeffrey, my friend. He is my neighbor, but I was saying,
really?
Yeah, long time no see.
This is how it works, right? We see each other online in this time we live in. Anyway, so what Jeffrey's saying is so critical. And your question, I want to link it there, because those movements, but Garvey and others did not move forward unless they had women doing all the work.
Yes.
So people see Garveyism now as not just Marcus Garvey alone, but Garvey and the power of the two wives. Because like you said, Amy Ashwood was a co-founder of the
Yes.
movement. And Amy Jakes made him known. She's the one who wrote the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
So he was a powerful man, but these powerful men made sure they had powerful women. So I want to link that to Hubert Harrison, and I just finished this book on Black women and political leadership. And Hubert Harrison has a quote in a new book edited by Jeff Perry, The Struggle for Equality, where he says that that Amy Ashwood was such a live wire that he could understand why Garvey was able to move that rapidly with her help. And they had an interest as well, which is a story for the tabloids. But they had a sexual encounter, which is, if you get Jeff Perry's book, it's in there. But Amy Ashwood was like a very contemporary woman, if you think of a sense of feeling liberated and all of that. But Hubert Harrison, why Jeff Perry cheered, before Marcus Garvey, he was the person in Harlem. When Garvey came to Harlem, that's who he met doing the street corner speeches and so on. And Hubert Harrison actually is called the father of the Harlem Renaissance. Now, the Harlem Renaissance took place in the 20s, but Hubert Harrison named the new Negro movement. He actually used that language, which is the name that the Harlem Renaissance is also known by. So you have Hubert Harrison from the Virgin Islands living in Harlem and publishing a lot of stuff in pamphlets as people and selling them for like 13 cents or whatever. Back in the day, that's how people circulated. But linked to the other question, this is how in before the means of communication that we have now, blogs and all the various ways that newspapers circulate, this is how Black people got the word out. So even Frederick Douglass all the way back would be somebody who would use newspapers, all of them did, all the way through Claudia Jones with founding the first Black paper in London, the West Indian Gazette and Afro-Asian Caribbean News. So just saying that consistently there's been a link. Now, the women, many, and even at the start of Pan-Africanism, there were Black women there. But people just get the words of Du Bois, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, or they know about Sylvester Williams. But Anna Julia Cooper from Washington, D.C. was a delegate there. And she wrote a book called A Voice from the South in the same time period. And I believe that would be one of the reasons why she would have been invited, where she links race and gender in a way that people now talk about intersectionality. She was already doing that. So in other words, these theories that come up now, we have to always look back to see where those people were that actually were thinking through those questions and how they did them and how they circulated that information. So I'll stop there because I don't want to take up all the time.
And very well said. I mean, we do appreciate you, Dr. Boyce Davis, for that wonderful answer. And of course, at this time, let me say congrats and, the wonderful work you've been doing, continue doing so. Let me also welcome Mr. Stafford Grant from the Northeast. He's done a lot of work in Jamaica and here in the United States. Also, Dr. Mohammed Zakari wants to say thank you guys for, of course, holding such a great platform. And we're here to do that. And that's what we do. Continuing on, ladies and gentlemen, if you just tuned in, don't forget, it is none other than, did I get out the Zoom?
You're on still. We can see.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Next question is going on to Amanda. The civil rights movement was probably the biggest cause for social justice, and many Caribbean citizens such as Kwame Ture and Michael Thelwell were involved. Yet most people were unaware of the roles that the West Indian immigrants and Caribbean independent played. Talk to me more about the history of all that happened.
Sure. Just to say, thank you very much for inviting me onto this distinguished panel, and it's great to be here and among some distinguished guests as well. I see Dr. Rodney, Professor Cooper, and Professor Wilton as well. So thank you very much. When it comes to Kwame Ture, I'm going to try and ground this actually in Garvey because I think that seems to be the pattern so far. So a couple of things that relate between Garvey and Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture, he's born in Trinidad in 41. What's interesting about his family is that his family is a pan-Caribbean family. His mother is born in Panama to Montserratian and Antiguan parents, and his father, Adolphus, is born in Trinidad, but his roots are in Tobago and Barbados. So by the time Kwame Ture comes to the US, when he's about 10 years old, he already has a kind of global outlook. And it doesn't take long before he involves himself in the civil rights movement. Now, what's interesting is that as a teenager, he hangs out in Harlem at 125th Street, where he meets the step ladder speakers. And these are the remnants of the Garveyite movement in Harlem, dressed in, big sort of capacious robes and, head wraps and everything else. And this from an early age, grounds a sort of a kind of Africanity in him, which emerges later on, of course, in his life. So he becomes involved in the civil rights movement when he's 19 years old at Howard University, and he joins the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. He's doing the freedom rides. He's been arrested dozens of times. The police dogs are coming after them. They're getting hosed down by the police as well. But as the 60s draw on, he emerges as a prominent and eloquent speaker alongside King. But he also starts to lose faith in American democracy, actually. He has some attempts to try and organize political parties, and they're thwarted, even in one case by the intervention of President Johnson himself. And so by 66, we have the earthquake that Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael is known for, and this is Black Power. He starts to demand that we need Black Power. And this is a sort of a radical departure from the civil rights movement, where he's basically saying we can't rely on the established political structures. We need to think about self-organization. His critique starts to see the slums in which Black Americans are living in as colonies policed by the state authority. And he has a radical critique of capitalism. Now, as well as this, and I'll come into the second Garvey point in a minute, we start to see Black Power organizations spread out across the world. That same year, the Black Panthers are founded in 66. But we also see Black Power events taking place in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. 68, we have the Rodney riots. And 70, we have Trinidad's own Black Power revolution. And what's interesting is that there's correspondence within the British High Commission fearing that Carmichael will be invited back home and be crowned the new revolutionary leader of Trinidad. So on the second Garvey point, at the same time, Kwame Ture, by 67, he becomes a sort of a leading opponent of the Vietnam War. And he soon takes off on this global tour around the world where he meets some of the leading revolutionaries of the day. These include Kwame Nkrumah. It includes Julius Nyerere. He meets Walter Rodney in Dar es Salaam. But he also goes to he goes to Vietnam, and he meets Ho Chi Minh, the Vietnamese leader. And what's interesting about this meeting, and Kwame Ture writes about this, is that Ho Chi Minh instills in him this idea of him going back to Africa. And the reason Ho Chi Minh says that is that he was hanging around Harlem in the early 20th century and was attending Garvey's speeches, right? So Kwame Ture from the Caribbean to America ends up in Vietnam when he's introduced this idea of going back to Africa, So this really shows these kind of the sort of global networks that are taking place at this time. And of course, he lives for the last 30 years of his life in Africa and becomes a very important Pan-African figure, perhaps the most important of the sort of 70s, 80s, and the 90s.
Wow, great information. We thank you so much for all that. And of course, people, this is, of course, what you all need to know for Black History Month. We're here to understand and learn what our foreparents have done for us in the time. Now, this next question is going to you, Barbara Bullard. Harlem Renaissance was a powerful flowering of the arts. You have Claude McKay, you have Bert Smith and others. And Calypso at one time was even the attraction, like people of Maya Angelou. How does the legacy shows up in what we're seeing on our arts and cultural development today?
Well, I can say there's so many of us that were in the Harlem Renaissance, right? We can also add on Arturo Schomburg, Puerto Rican, Puerto Rico in the house. We can also add on Eric Waldron, who was from the British Guiana. And we can go on and on. I just have a couple of here that I totally kind of gravitate to. But the Harlem Renaissance is so relevant because it mirrors what's happening right now in the Black arts movement, the Black power movement, the Black Lives movement. The Harlem Renaissance at the time was a cultural movement of significant Black autonomy, and it was global. And it manifested the promise of a diasporic consciousness, the consciousness of the African diaspora. And that's what we're like gravitating to right now, within art and culture. Also, it exemplifies a literary expression of positive Black consciousness. And that's something that we, with the Black Lives Movement, I think, that just opened the door for so many young artists and filmmakers and visual artists, authors, to be able to gravitate to their culture. It also provided a political movement to counter racism and colonialism. And, of course, we can talk about racism, y'all, that's happening in 2021, right? And it's providing the opportunity for young people to understand, also to gravitate to our culture within the Harlem Renaissance and understand so many people that were effective during that time period. It also helps to shift the paradigm that we've been existing in the art and culture landscape. And also provides a Black narrative and storytelling. So now we're seeing filmmakers coming out with some really cool stories, right? Talking about our land, where we're from, and also the relevance of our heritage and how we can use those seeds, to move forward in terms of social justice. It's interesting that I'm going to go to the poet Amanda Gorman during the inauguration. Yes. I'm just going to talk about that for a second. I think that her presentation was a reflection of our culture, our Caribbean culture as well, and in reference to how we can be storytellers using verbiage from our culture, from the land, from the trees and from the flowers, to know that that's where our power is, that's where our power lies, and no one could take that away from us. So I was thrilled to hear her speak. In reference to visual art, we have Kara Walker, we have Bisa Butler, who's new on the landscape in terms of visual art, and they create textile, which is from our culture. Yes. They create beautiful pieces that is not using any painting at all. They're using fabric that we use for communication among each other. And in the Harlem Renaissance, that particular aspect of art was definitely replicated in terms of the artist Aaron Douglas. There's several artists that they all worked together and they understood the relevance of the Caribbean heritage and how there would not be no Harlem Renaissance without it, because that's the richness in the landscape of that particular time period. And lastly, I like to say that in reference to printmaking, we have really cool new artists that are understanding that the printmaking came from the Harlem Renaissance. How can you access printmaking to be able to tell our story, to be able to pick up the colors, the rich textures, and be able to for people to understand that they can't replicate us because we're actually accessing the information from our culture. And Catherine Dunham, in terms of dance, during the Harlem Renaissance, she actually went to Haiti, Jamaica, Trinidad, Martinique, and she was the founder of being able to use Black dance and ritual dance and brought it back to this country. And now we have the Alvin Ailey Dance Company.
Nice.
Right? So these are some of the examples. I mean, music, we can go on and on about that. I won't take up too much time, but our history, our reflection in the Harlem Renaissance has gravitated all the way to the 21st century. Yes. And our young people are now picking up the mantle and understanding that our voice matters within those landscapes.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Bullard. We do appreciate that. Well said. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, I see more and more people coming in. We're having a discussion on Caribbean contributions to social justice in America. So at this time, anyone on the call would like to ask questions, please freeze throw. We got the book, young man says, greetings from Harlem. So I guess, Barbara, that was for your talk. So someone is just saying that. Anyone on the
post the question in the chat, please. Pose your question.
Oh, yeah, pose the question in the chat. So I'll just read them as we go along. And again, like I said, it's a discussion, folks. So you're free to ask questions, and it's all about the Caribbean contributions. So many people have done so much in, of course, the United States and the world, like Barbara said, all over the world. And talk about the Harlem Renaissance. That was a turning point. You know, you see art, you see all these actors and filmmakers now coming out, Spike Lee, you know, Tyler Perry, all of them doing all these great things. And it's because of that. And of course, Barbara, we do thank you so much for, you know, enlightening us. We're going to talk more about that as we go along right here. So as we move along, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Claire, thank you again. People keep saying thank you for having this forum. We're going to have a follow-up to this, not just what a load. And before I go any further, just to let people know that Black History is just not the month of February. It's all throughout the year. So let's get everybody acclimated to that so that we know how we can, of course, treat our brothers and sisters. And we see a lot of things happening here in the United States and throughout the world where Black people are now stepping up in power more so than ever before. And like Barbara mentioned, and like Dr. Davis mentioned, women are really, really showing what really needs to be done. And of course, fellas, I'm going to say this as a man, we need to respect and protect our women, because this is what's going to have helped us in the future. Because I mean, you can't have a positive struggle that we fight every day and be successful without our women. All right, moving right along.
Let me just ask this question before we move to the next segment. Can Dr. Jeffrey or Dr. Carol speak to Nanny of the Maroons and her legacy for our current climate today? Because socially, she's a hot topic.
Carol, you want to go first?
I can. I think when I look at Nanny of the Maroons, I put her down as a Black woman leader from way at the start. And one who used all the skills at her disposal to lead her people and to protect them.
Very nice.
This is how I want to read Nanny of the Maroons. And of course, she uses spirituality, she uses body, she uses self, she uses everything. So I think that's the way I want to frame her. I know she's a Jamaican national hero, so I let Jeffrey go there with that. Yeah.
Well, yes, I mean, Nanny combined all of those. She brought everything together, and she was also an innovator in guerrilla warfare. In fact, there are now whole courses devoted to studying how Nanny used. I mean, she taught her warriors, you know, how to stand still for hours, because there was only this little pathway up into where the Maroons were. And so it was a single walkway. And she would have her warriors in camouflage, leaves, twigs, everything. And British soldiers would pass by this one little walkway, and they would sit there and they would wait until the last one went through, and they would just then attack and pick them up one by one. And this was why the Maroons were never defeated under Nanny's leadership. So she brought together the spirituality and everything else. To go back to my favorite, because here's the thing: every time I think that I'm smarter than Marcus Garvey, he proves me wrong. And that's a whole nother discussion. But one of the things that Garvey said was he wished he had more women in the movement. He said because he wanted people with backbones and not wishbones. Wow. You know, and that was how Garvey talked about the women, because the women really led the charge in the Garvey movement. You know, and one of the things that we still haven't solved, even now, is if we want to really get to solving human rights, women's rights are human rights. And if we solve this, well, we're seeing it now as a problem, the problem of equality and equity. If we work into the system, women's right at the core of our discussion about rights, then everything else will follow.
Okay,
Yeah,
very well
if I
said.
could just add one more thing to Jeffrey's point.
Carol, a question
Yeah.
actually came in for you. So tie this into your answer. Somebody wants to know about the intersectionality question. So if you can tie that into your question.
Okay.
Your
I was
response,
going to
sorry.
say with Nani, also the question of science, and that's the other piece of it that is really critical because, you know, people just describe the mythical aspects of her with a cauldron and all that, but this was a herbalist. This was somebody using herbs, using scientific technologies and remedies in order to advance what it is she needed to do for her people, heal them,
Yes.
protect them, and all of those other things.
Yes.
Intersectionality has been made popularized now, and it's overdone, I think, or commodified, we say in class, because it's used now in the media in all kinds of ways. But actually, it meant to really talk about the ways that race and gender particularly intersect, so that you can't, if you're working with just race alone, then and you miss the question of gender, then you totally leaving out the issues that have to do with Black women. So Black women fall out then of that frame if you don't look at them in some sort of conjunctive way. But along with that, other women like Claudia Jones added class. So the question of women, race, and class, which Angela Davis also popularized, would also be something that allows us to look at those interconnections. So one can use different language. It's just that intersectionality has become very popular, but it's a way that these various systems in which locate us end up connecting and imbricating each other, and definitely impacting how we live in the world, how we see in the world, how we are taken when we walk into a room, how we are not allowed to advance in the ways we should in certain contexts, how we push past them using that same thing. So the combinations then, and different groups, Black feminists in the 80s used interlocking oppressions to talk about it. In Africa, they talk about systems of oppression, the way these systems, whether it's colonialism, racism, sexism, combine to disadvantage women in those cultural contexts. So that's just one of the ways to think of it, or few of the ways, I should say, to think of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. Jeffrey, I want to go back to something you said about Garvey wanted more women in his campaign. Elaborate a little bit more on the reason why it wasn't so, because this man was so powerful. Was it because of the time, or is it something that women weren't given the rights back then?
Well, I hate to say that Garvey was also a man of his time. And sometimes, no matter how brilliant a leader you are, you really cannot. I mean, there were some parts that he could envision beyond, but there were some things that because of his time and also because of his arrogance. I mean, my appreciation of Garvey is not uncritical. He had some gangster instincts. He had some dictatorial instincts there, which were not exactly democratic. You know, I mean, when he got angry with the guy, the ship captain, I mean, he went down there and beat up the man. You know,
he did.
Yeah, jump on the boat and beat him up. Even in fact, when he was in Jamaica, when he was being tried in court, and the person who was opposing him was Norman Washington Manley, and Garvey called him out and said, "You want to go outside and fight?" And his lawyer said to him, "This man used to box in England, so you don't want to fight him?" And Garvey said, "All right, cool it. You know, we won't fight outside. we won't fight outside." But Garvey was also a pugilist and everything else. So yes, he does. I mean, he does have these shortcomings. He's living in a time of empire, so he's going to engage with the tactics of empire. You know, and so those are the things that we in the 21st century need to look at and go, well, you know, but as I said earlier, there would be no Marcus Garvey without Amy Jakes Garvey. I mean, she wrote the philosophy and opinions of Marcus Garvey, and he, you know, again, she basically writes the book for him, and he says, send it out to all of these people. And he sends it out and da, da, da. And she comes back and she's down to like 98 pounds. She literally, while Garvey was in jail, wrote all of these petitions, did everything. She lived for Garvey. And so did these, Henrietta Vinton Davis. I mean, there are so many women in the Garvey movement. And nearly everywhere you go, even when he goes back to Jamaica, there are women again. Sister Samad. I mean, he had brilliant women among him.
Yes.
So we cannot downplay. I mean, yes, he's a brilliant man, but he would have been nowhere without the women that surrounded him.
Thank you so much. Very well said. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the halfway point right here. We're having a discussion on Caribbean contributions to social justice here in the United States. And before we move on to part two, Carolyn had a very interesting point, and Amanda or Dr. Davis, I want you guys to take this one. Nanny, she said, should be the proper title of Nana. Elaborate on that for me.
I take that under advisement, and it's a great correction. If it's my friend Carolyn Cooper, then she's
actually I have when I started looking at this Nana issue and I went to Ghana, so first I recognized that was a title. And
exactly.
I believe the other thing I would say I intuited was that, and I got confirmation because I read a poem that spoke to that soon after I had this intuition, that she actually was sent.
Yeah.
So she did not just was captured, quote unquote. She was sent. Spirit sent her to the Caribbean, because how is it that her brothers and herself are one family is captured, right? And they all became leaders of the rebellion movement. And in a matriarchal society that is the Akan people, she would have been a force to be reckoned to keep the brothers, for example. She's the one that carries the story. So that power that she embodied, knowing her rights as a woman from that tribe, would have made her a Nana. And the other Akan slaves would have called her that because they would recognize her as that. And so, of course, the British, not knowing, and the people who are writing would say Nanny, because that's what they called black people who are mothers, right? So Nanny is a pejorative in some instances, but to bring it back to today, one of the things I like to say, and as we move to the next section, is that when we think about Black women in America right now and the role in social justice and the white male power structure, the fact that they were nannies who have mothered and had to nurture young white men who have had to young white babies, etc., in bringing them up when their parents are out at work, their lawyers, their doctor parents, etc. There, for some white males, there is a psychology about Black females as authority figures. So it may not be necessarily a bad thing to also not always be so negative around the nanny emblem, because it actually could also be seen as a source of power that we can now reclaim, understanding that we actually cradled the hands that raped us. And that's a very powerful idea. Because if we're going to change society, in this society right now where we are, then we have to be able to marry our guerrilla warfare mentality with our love energy, the one love energy that we have, in order to move like guerrillas through the system. Because what Garvey said still holds true. We don't have no boat, we don't have no airplane, we don't have no gun factory. We have nothing other than the energy that we have. And so we have to marry that power, that spiritual and psychic power that we have to move as guerrilla warriors, to create the justice and room for ourselves to create a better world for all as we go forward. So I think we're right into part two. So what's happening now and how do we see the future? Donovan.
All right, thank you so much. One quick thing before we go to part two. Amanda, I'm going to point this one to you. Dr. Mohammed asks a quick question. Do the brothers and sisters in Africa know the history of the resistance to colonial terrorism in the Caribbean, and to what extent? Just take 2 minutes and elaborate.
Yeah, sure. I'm so just so you're clear, I'm of Caribbean descent. I'm a national of Trinidad and Tobago. I was born and bred in London, but I currently live in Senegal. Even though I'm in London right now, I live in Senegal right now. So I've experienced, you know, what it's like to be someone from the diaspora, living in Africa. And unfortunately, I mean, I have to say that knowledge about the Caribbean is limited, in you know, at least in Senegal. People will know about, you know, the American struggle. People took the knee when there was Black Lives Matter, when George Floyd was slain. But the Caribbean is something which doesn't really enter the consciousness of people there. And it's interesting because, you know, something like 30% of the slaves that were brought across the Middle Passage went to the Caribbean. A much smaller percentage went to the United States, 4, 5, 6%, right? But there's not much knowledge of the Caribbean, and you know, that's something quite interesting in and of itself. I wanted maybe just to sort of talk about the position of women, but also African women, you know, within the context of Kwame Ture. And what's very interesting is that in the 70s and in the 80s, the party that he leads, which is called the All African People's Revolutionary Party, starts to think about instituting a women's wing, basically, within the party, in order to really open up its membership and to really focus on women's issues. And what they do is that they begin to gather information from other liberation movements across Africa. So they look at the role of women played in the liberation movement in Mozambique. They look at the role women played in the liberation movements in Zimbabwe. They look at the role of women in Guinea. And they bring these together. And they also look in, obviously, at what's going on in the United States. And they also come up with this critique, which looks at the triple oppression of class, gender, and also race as well. And what I think of this critique is that this is a critique that is looking at women, not just in the United States, but also looking at Black women around the world, right? When we say class, we're looking at, you know, Black peasants in Africa, as well as factory workers in the United States as well. So this is a global critique and not just one rooted in a particular country.
Can I add something to that, though? There are pockets of knowledge, and I think with Dakar and Senegal, it may be linguistic as well in terms of language transferal. But there's the story I give that I've written about in Caribbean spaces. I was going by road between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire up north. We went by road up north, and then we were crossing over the border. And I was trying to communicate to the guard in my horrible French about where I'm from, because he's looking at my Trini passport and saying, "What is this? Where is this place? Who knows?" You know. And he wouldn't, you know, he kept turning it around. I was with an African-American sister and she got it. And I was like, okay. And I kept saying things about, you know, different language, and he wouldn't get it. And then I said, Bob Marley. And he's like, Les Antilles. So basically there are triggers that people know about that in the music. When Sparrow came to Nigeria, when I was there, he was shocked at how famous he was, because there's a whole generation who went to London and so on, who knew Sparrow, knew the songs, knew the calypsos, knew everything. And they actually gave him a title when he was there. So I think, and the same thing probably, I see Pat on the screen, in Tanzania, you'd also have a different kind of constellation with people like Loxley Edmondson, who was my colleague working at Makerere in Uganda as well. So I think you have pockets, and then there are Rastas who've moved back to places like Shashamani, Ethiopia, and I went there, and they're home, and they have a school, and they're doing all kinds of things. So since the continent is so vast, keep in mind that you will have these circulations in different places, and the people touch and leave depending on the kinds of conjunctions. So after Mandela leaves Dakar, there'll be a whole group of people who understand a particular place that he comes from. Keep in mind, the media doesn't circulate our knowledge in that way, right? So people get knowledge only by encounters, by now, of course, the young people are looking at the dance hall, and everybody can do the same moves with their legs and their butt and whatever. But he said, I think Jamaicans choreography has become worldwide now. Dancehall choreography. And you see it in Ghana, you see it everywhere, because people remember those moves in their own cultural frameworks and do versions of those, right? Yemi Alade and so on. So basically we have pockets, we have connections, we have places where we need to amplify. And then keep in mind, one other thing I said recently, and this links well to what Claire's project is, that Ghana and Barbados, Ghana and Guyana recently instituted a way of traveling or having airline transportation and trade that does not cross through the United States or does not go through Europe, which is the problem, of course, to get to cross to these places, which actually from where Amandla lives, and I visited Dakar for a while and hung a little bit with Amandla, you could actually see the closest point to the Americas. And from there to the Americas is way shorter than going to New York. So the connections are there. We just, and of course, we know Africans went before, right? Before Columbus,
yes.
but on that same route. So basically the connections are there. How then do we rebuild them? We've been struggling with that. And I noticed Claire mentioned the Pan-African Heritage Museum. And the other one in Dakar similarly attempted to create a structure for us to have an understanding of our civilizations in a global context.
Thank you so much.
But this, remember too, that the whole purpose of the Black Star Line was not just to have passengers, but also to transport goods from the Caribbean to Africa.
Right.
You know, which is why in Ghana, Garvey is such a revered figure. The Black Star Line, the Black Star is on the flag of Ghana. And the other thing too, with the whole pockets of knowledge, the Negro World was published in English, French, and Spanish. Remember, when Garvey was in Costa Rica and Panama, and he actually edited newspapers. You can't edit a newspaper without having a thorough knowledge of Spanish. So Garvey also could read and write and speak Spanish.
Beautiful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, time is pressing for us. We're discussing, of course, contributions by Caribbeans here in the United States for social justice. And of course, we're going to go into part 2. Thank you guys so much for listening. And let me say thank you to all those who are from the Northeast diaspora. We do appreciate you under the leadership of Dr. Karen Dunkley. As we move along, anyone can answer this question. In more recent times, especially the civil rights era, we have great artists like Sidney Poitier, the late Cicely Tyson, Harry Belafonte, and more who have opened up the doors for this generation. How have their roles impacted conversation on social justice in films, art, Broadway, television, and so forth? Anyone can answer.
Well, I'll start with Poitier. Remember the film In the Heat of the Night?
Yes.
When the sheriff slaps him, and he slaps him right back without hesitation. I don't think any African American at that time could have done that.
Yes.
I think only someone who grew up in the Caribbean, who had this innate sense of self and was not afraid of white people. So he could do it without thinking, without playing. You slap me, I'm going to slap you back. And that, right. And that was the thing that frightened me. Because you see, when you grow up, I'll speak for myself. When you grow up in a place like Jamaica, right? During my time, your prime minister is black. Your member of parliament is black. Your mayor is black. Everybody is black. And you see them functioning in role. Rex Nettleford, we you know,
right.
You know, you see these accomplished people. You really have no fear, you know, and so that's why at that moment only Sidney Poitier could do that without hesitation.
Nice. Next question: in what other ways can art?
I want to add though.
Go ahead, Doc.
That slap resounds around the world, but I want to add that to think about the fact that Harry Belafonte was the best-selling record of that time.
Yes.
But he was also a movement man. And maybe Barbara would have studied this because in the 60s, he was very much a part of the Martin Luther King civil rights movement.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, Barbara, from terms of the work that a woman now, like a Shirley Chisholm in New York, being a part of that whole New York Caribbean party / calypso music scene, how that might have also helped to shape a formation of someone like that now to say, wait a minute, it's not just about marching for rights. As a woman, I can do more. So I think to some extent that the music and the arts, the fact they could use their arts to kind of win a platform, those two, I think, were very unafraid to put their art form on the line for the cause, right? Because that was a time when the South was still segregated.
Yes.
Yes.
And some in New York were segregated. So the arts actually was a vehicle for social change. And Barbara, you might want to speak to that. You might know much more than I do, but I do think that is something we need to pay attention to now. What does that mean today in hip hop, right? When most of the hip hop to me, which is actually founded by a Jamaican, right? How does that, and he's not the one that's making the billions of dollars.
Thank you.
Right? But meanwhile, those who are making the billions of dollars, we don't see that same intellectual commitment to social justice issues. There's more like what I call the destination peddling of the ideas of social justice, but it's not really there in the truth of what they do. Barbara, I think you should talk about what you think about that from an art. You're very heavily steeped in the arts.
Well, actually, I've sat with Mr. Belafonte several times. Can you hear? You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. And one of the conversations that the Shirley Chisholm Cultural Institute had with Mr. Belafonte not too long ago was that he was discouraged by the fact that he thought that his generation was going to, save the future generations, right? He was concerned that that the next generation somehow lost sight after them. Even though the young people now are getting it, they're getting it, but he is concerned that the generation after the 60s, that they were so they put their lives on the line. Like, I don't even know how they slept at night. Some of them had people that wanted to murder them. They had hits on them.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk.
Be real. Yes,
that's real talk. Their families. That kind of thing, right? But one of the things that he said is that he thought that from all of that they will be able to save the next generation, right? But that didn't happen. The next generation got lost. But now the new generation is picking the mantle up, and they're understanding the relevance of the struggle. Did I answer your question, Dr. Nelson?
Yeah, can I add something, please?
Go right ahead, Dr.
Barbara, I'm so happy to hear about your work, and I'd love to connect with you after. But I don't think they were lost. I think what happened was the door got open, and there was this attempt to sort of assimilate into the mainstream American culture, at least. So tell him, we pass those messages on to the next generation. I'm sure almost all of the students I've worked with, so at some level, were involved in some of that organizing. So I'm just saying that we ended up, my generation ended up getting into the academic structures or the business structures or whatever. But that often compromises people, and you end up like thinking you really part of the system until what happened to Cornel West happens to you, right? So, I mean, look how far somebody like him could get and then still be dissed by Harvard whenever they feel like it. So I think we have to be really real about that. But let me just add one other thing. Maya Angelou, even though she is identified more with poetry in her later years, this is somebody who went and lived in Ghana. This is somebody who sang calypso, as I think was mentioned earlier. Yes. This is somebody whose grandfather jumped ship, she said, in Tampa from Trinidad, and this is how she got that Caribbean piece. This is somebody who worked with Malcolm X. She was in Ghana as part of the group that received people like him when they came. So we have to look at people like Maya Angelou in more complicated ways than we do. But also keep in mind people like Audre Lorde, who had a Google yesterday, and my students were like so blown away by that. Caribbean descent as well, poet. theorist, really amazingly connected, worked with women in South Africa, helped Afro-German women define their identity as Afro-Germans and so on. So we have a consistent strand of people making the way and creating pathways, and we have to make sure that we keep that going in each generation so that we don't have that Belafonte feeling of disregard. I think he was upset that the artists in particular, the famous ones, and I won't call any names, that they don't really give back as much. Every now and then they do something. But look at Rihanna. Rihanna is out there and she's quite involved. She's challenging Modi of India for human rights violations. So we still have some people who are like, even with the acquisition of wealth, which went with their prominence, are able now to still go back and give back something tangible and to be really out there using their platform, which they have, to talk about these violations.
Well, here's the thing, Carol. I have my own problem with my generation because we've not institutionalized the progress that was made. I mean, I look at Jamaica, you know, all of these brilliant people, all of these brilliant minds that passed through, the leaders that I looked up to. And I really can't say, looking through the Caribbean, that we really have the consciousness that Belafonte, Poitier, all of those, Touré brought to the struggle. And I think part of it, I know, I mean, people want to save their lives, but I think with Rodney, that just shut down, you know, like how in the Kent State here in America, Kent State just shut down American white liberalism. Mm-hmm. I think the death of Rodney did the same thing to the Caribbean. And then later with what happened in Grenada and with Manly and with everything else, people went, you know what? Maybe this freedom thing is not something we want to do. And so is every man for himself or every woman for herself.
True. That very well taken. Dr. Davis and Barbara, you made a very good point. As a media personality myself, we know the history of, you know, Caribbean music, African music, and hip hop music. Cool DJ Herc brought reggae music here and turned it into hip hop. And like you said earlier, they're not getting the millions that, you know, the Jay-Z's and those who use it to fortify themselves. But looking back in the 80s, I remember I met KRS-One. He had some deep knowledge of, you know, the Caribbean roots and wanted to put everything out there. Then Public Enemy came and, you know, started to do a whole bunch of political stuff where they're talking about social economic issues out there. And after that, you kind of see it kind of fade down a bit. I mean, are we afraid of who is at the helm of the music industry, why they're not pushing to have more done on a social justice issue?
I think that in the middle of COVID-19, this horrible pandemic, artists and those, you know, in the cultural landscape are not afraid, right? They're actually building their own networks now. They're using this opportunity, a lot of them, to build their own, they understand, let me step back for a second. They understand what that system is. And they also understand that the system was not built for us. So what I'm seeing, my experience has been within the past year, you know, 2020 to 2021, more and more creatives are building their own networks and understanding that they don't have to sell themselves to be relevant and to be sustainable.
Yeah.
I would just like to add as well, we shouldn't also forget that the kind of the Caribbean and also the revolutionary roots of hip hop itself. DJ Kool Herc, Africa Bambaataa, you know, and these were Grandmaster Flash. These were people of Caribbean descent, right, as well. And there was a revolutionary intent, really, from the beginnings of hip hop, and it really kind of is part of the legacy of Black Power, really, as well. We can say. And that obviously, as it becomes kind of commodified, it becomes a kind of, you know, global force. That message obviously changes. I just wanted to also add about we spoke about the different generations, what was achieved and what wasn't achieved.
Mm-hmm.
We should also not underestimate the strength of things like the structural adjustment policies, which we saw in Jamaica, in other parts of the Caribbean, and also in Africa. The war on drugs,
Yes.
Mass incarceration, in terms of literally, when you look at some of the, Black Panthers from the era, some of them are still in jail.
Yes.
You had the Move. They dropped bombs on Move in Philadelphia. So there were efforts to really shut us down as well. And we shouldn't shy away from talking about that, because people lost their lives as well. I just want to add that point.
That's true.
And as we're talking about hip hop and the cultural influence, we can't move. I can't move forward without talking about Daddy U. Roy, the original toaster,
the late great,
rest in power, Daddy U. Roy. I'm gonna wear you to the ball tonight.
Yes.
And again, you're hearing. That was so powerful, to go to a dance, to go to a fete, and somebody is singing a song, telling you a story from our point of view. Tick a bow, wow, wow. You can't beat that.
That is so true. Before we move on to the next question, I want to ask this. Anyone can answer. The younger generation, are there enough that's being provided in school to educate them on the struggle of social justice here in the United States? Barbara?
I couldn't stop shaking my head no. No.
Reading chat, everybody is saying no.
No. And the fact is that we have issues with technology. I mean, a lot of our children don't even have the equipment that they need. So how are they going to understand what we're talking about if they can't even get the programming to support the information? Yes, there are some of us out here that's building stuff. Yes. Believe me when I tell you, but we are doing it independently of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But we can't.
I want to say something there about the educational system, and I want to throw my own country under the bus here, because we have Marcus Garvey as national hero. And everybody just think of Marcus Garvey. I think he's a 50 cents coin or something. I don't know what thing he's on. But that is the only consciousness of Garvey. If it wasn't for Burning Spear, people like me who grew up in the Michael Mann era wouldn't have even known what Marcus Garvey meant.
Right.
And I actually didn't become a student of Marcus Garvey till I got older and was trying to understand the development gap, right? Why is it that we're continuing trying to develop and we can't move forward? And the final crux of my education came when I was writing a docudrama, I call it, Job's Tale, when Emancipation Day was reinstated, right? And I was doing some work to kind of play, and I said, oh my God, this man was a genius.
Yes.
And I actually cried. I said, my God, I hated history in high school. The only reason why I got a good grade because I actually made up stuff and wrote in the exam, pretend you're a farmer, pretend you're a slave owner, pretend you're a Carib Indian. So every essay I answered was pretend. I was good at making believe. But we didn't understand the substance of the history. So when we're looking at what we're teaching now, and the fact that also we have a subtext in our mind that says slavery is done, gone, long time. Stop talking about that now. So we're told we should forget because it's in the past. But it's still in the DNA of how we treat each other. It's still in the DNA of the words we use to describe our hair, our she dark but she good looking. It's still in the DNA of the structures of our society where people are still bleaching in Jamaica, where Rasta was found. How can you be bleaching in a country where Rasta was found? You would not think that would exist. So I think that not only America, but even in the Caribbean, we have done a very poor job of teaching history. We have taught history through the white gaze, and it's time that stopped. History needs to be taught from a Black perspective, and where the children and the young people do critical thinking, and UWI and the Teachers College need to start teaching teachers to teach history that way. Otherwise, we have no hope of learning from the past, as Marcus Garvey would say, to move forward. I start at his hat because every time I think about Marcus Garvey, I get so angry.
Wow.
Yeah, if I could just say for people like me, just at one point, and somebody posted, and we should actually note this, that today is the birthday of Sidney Poitier. So at this month of February has several of these birthdays. We did Toni Morrison, also Audrey Lorde a couple of days ago, Frederick.
Yes.
Right, but I want to agree with all that has been said before. For one reason, teaching at the university, often that's the first time the students encounter any of that knowledge.
Yes.
So that means the entire, they say during high school, they may get 1 day or 1 week where they talk about Martin Luther King or something, and that's it. But they don't have, unless they really went to a school that had advanced teaching about these topics, they don't get it. So then they're shocked by the time they get to university. And then keep in mind, in university, often if they're doing engineering or whatever, the space to do course in Black studies is very, small. So maybe they may get a course, or maybe not at all. So that means you have generations who are going to go right through the university and never be touched by this knowledge. And then they don't get it in elementary school or before, including, you're right, Claire, including Caribbean children. Yes. I had one student who said in her family, this was this last semester, that she thought Batman was a real word because that was so popularly used in her household. So, and it wasn't until she gets older and realized that's not, that's not a term you use. So basically within the households, we're not teaching children in an expansive way about love, about people, about everything. And I thought that was important to at least have that indicated that it has to start really earlier, way earlier.
But, and here's the thing, Marcus Garvey is not even taught in Jamaica in the curriculum. For years now, we have been trying to get Garvey into the curriculum. And every successive government, it didn't matter, JLP, PNP, whatever kind of P you want to P, no Marcus Garvey. And when I joined with Claire and Dr. Julius Garvey, just here in Miami, we gathered 11,000 signatures and we turned them into my representative, Frederica Wilson, to present to Barack Obama for the exoneration of Marcus Garvey. I will tell you something that stuck with me. Joe Biden says we mustn't hold grudges, but I hold this grudge. I was giving this lecture and this young man from Jamaica said to me, the only thing that Marcus Garvey left us was the lyrics.
Wow.
Lost.
Careless Ethiopians.
Lost. Well, I mean, like I said, we're going to have to find ways in which we can implement this in the curriculum, not only kids in the Caribbean.
But here's the thing, our leaders know. This is what I'm saying.
But we have to put pressure on them, Jeffrey. That's what we got to do. We got to put pressure on them.
Let's move it forward to what next? Because we're 15 minutes from the end.
Oh, Lord.
We're talking about the present and future.
All right.
The leaders know, why are they not doing it? Because there's a fear. Is there a fear? And I don't know what is there a fear of making more people become woke and change the system? And now that we're at a stage where humanity can actually destroy itself, right? Think about where we are. We're now living in a matrix, right? We cannot go nowhere, right? If you say the wrong thing and piss off the wrong people too much, you can be cut off of the internet. If you cannot march and you cannot be on the internet, where we go? We don't have any satellite that we can control. We don't have any search engine that we control. So we don't have any. So I'm saying, if we're talking about social justice and Black History Month and we want to keep it real, we can't wait on the government. So the question is, what might we be thinking about doing differently? And this is for all the speakers and even people who are not speakers, because it's 4:14 and we want to hear from other people at this point, right? What it is that we ought to be thinking about doing in using our other avenues of community organization, churches? Should we be engaging in subtle ways of self-education to be at least preparing the next generation that we don't go down to fulfill the actual testimony of the Bible, that we will be all become the, morons under control of something?
Well said. All right, I have one more thing before we get out of here. I want to touch on this really important issue. Shirley Chisholm, she was a political powerhouse who inspired women of color in terms of racial and gender equality and helped pave the way for justice. We saw now that we have the first female vice president of the United States, and that of Kamala Harris. What exactly does this mean, not only for women, but immigrants here in this country?
I've been writing about this, so maybe I'll start. Actually, I have a book coming out on this, hopefully by the end of the year, called Alternative Presidents. So looking at the women's leadership in the rest of the world as well. Well, Shirley Chisholm is so formidable, but the key thing I want people to get with her is that she decided that white men should not necessarily always be leaders. She said that. Why should it just be white males in leadership? And therefore she decided to put herself out there deliberately to challenge that premise. And it happened when she went to Congress. And of course, when she decided to run for the presidency, where even Black men met in Chicago, North Lake, Chicago, to say, well, it should be a Black man, not a Black woman. So she was battling all those different levels. At the same time, she was very conscious of the ways in which her decision to represent her people or to be a leader in her community was being challenged from multiple areas. So she has so many examples that I think we are worth looking at. So everybody, Kamala, Hillary, everybody who is running, whether at the local level, whether at the state level, she modeled the idea that Stacey Abrams is a good example too, that losing is not necessarily losing at all. That failing is not really failing in that context, but it's really a challenge to the structures that think you should not even be there. And that failure technically means that other people can come after you. So it's not a failure, it's actually a win. So it's an interesting way that she framed her own activism to challenge all of those things. And there's several other things I could say, but I know Barbara probably has a way more to add as well.
Well, I'll keep it short due to time. Thank you, Carol. Basically, well, I'm the president of the Shirley Chisholm Cultural Institute that was founded by Ms. Chisholm in 1977. So I'll just say 2 points because it can go on forever, right? One of the things that Shirley Chisholm worked toward was the civil rights legislation, which is now, we look at it as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And what we're looking at is that a lot of those rights within under that umbrella are so similar to the Black Bill of Rights. Her vision was way ahead of us. I mean, she was a visionary, and I agree. You know what Carol had just said is that her vision. She was preparing for us. It was not that she lost. She did not lose. She knew exactly what she was doing.
Yes.
She was the ultimate strategist, right? And that's something that we need to share with our young people, how to strategize, how to debate, you know, how to understand the bigger scale, the wider landscape of our existence as people of color, right? So she wasn't upset about any of that. I mean, you know, she went on and on. I mean, like, for instance, you know, the National Organization of Women, you know, she fought for the rights of gay rights before that was even discussed. You know, she fought for the Vietnam War to be over while this country was still profiting off of it, excuse me. So I'm going to stop because I can go on. But my point in saying that is that she replicates who we can be. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we need to share. You know, I know we have Madam Vice President in office, and we're going to, you know, but she even needs to understand that Congresswoman Chisholm
Yes.
is what we can be.
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bullard. One quick question before we get out of here, because I know we're pressed for time and people have questions to ask. Talking about what you just said, Barbara and Dr. Davis, we understand that, yes, the Black Revolution is here, but me as a Caribbean, I was born and raised in Jamaica, came here, I'm here almost 40 years now. One of the biggest problems I see still happening in America is that Caribbeans and Africans are having problems and tension with Black Americans. How can we erase that? Anyone?
I think going back to my man, Marcus Garvey, one God, one aim, one destiny. Even in the creation of the flag, the red, the black, and the green, which is a flag that unites all of us. If we go back to that Pan-African vision that Garvey had, and subsequent historians, John Henry Clark, all of these, they really had a vision of the African diaspora.
Yes.
And I think what has happened is that even we in the Caribbean, we can't even have a working federation of islands. I mean, global warming is affecting all of our Caribbean islands, but we have no structure. And Hellshire Beach, where I used to go as a young man, Hellshire Beach is gone. So we right now we have an ecological crisis. And I think probably one of the ways that we could unite around is this common threat, that the ecological crisis that we're facing in terms of global climate disruption, how is it going to affect all of us? And how can we band together to solve, or at least pressure, the industrialized nations into recognizing that this is a threat? But at the same time, the Chinese are buying up Africa.
Yes.
All right. So don't expect any sort of Pan-Africanism to be coming out. Because again, remember the Berlin Conference that cut up Africa. The same, I mean, I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Philip. No, Dr. Nelson, we're running out of time here. Do you want to open it up for questions or just?
Well, I just wanted us all to think about that question, because we're talking about social justice. We have had a very rough year, and even after George Floyd passed, and if people can stay until after 4:30, we can go a little bit longer. Yeah, but if people have to go past 4:30, that's fine. I mean, go at 4:30, that's fine. But I think we need to take a little bit more time just to kind of address this, because with the George Floyd moment and the Black Lives Matter moment, and I say moment as opposed to movement, because it happened at a point where we're in a deeper well of COVID, right? Yes. And you talk about the ecological crisis, and it still seems far off from most people. But the COVID crisis is personal for everybody. And we were not even able to get some critical information I've been asking for as ICS. How much of the dollar spent in doing clinical trial research on vaccines in the Caribbean and tests in the Caribbean? Is there any matching money for Caribbean scientists to do research on ganja and other herbs that we know have efficacy in curing lung problems? No answer. Nobody from Caribbean Public Health would answer, right? Okay, I'm talking to some Africans who are on the continent, and they're trying to do research on anti-malaria, same hydrochloroquine, how it can be used as a prophylactic. Could they get any funding for their research? Absolutely not. Or what it was so limited that it was almost like it's set up to prove that it couldn't work. When that's already accessible over the counter in Africa, and it is already made in Africa. So if we're talking about also now a healthcare, personalized medicine, genome designed healthcare industry complex, right? Then obviously a vaccination is more useful because you're going to continue reselling it every 2 or 3 years. You have to be revaccinated.
Yes.
And here again, the African countries and the Caribbean countries should be coming together along with the Pacific countries, right? The group of 77 originally, to say, raise a question. We have right now a situation where the president, the prime minister of St. Vincent is on the UN Security Council. Health is a security issue. I have seen no pronouncements, right, from the 2 African and Caribbean countries that are now on the UN Security Council to place it in the context of security, right? Guyana is the chair of the United Nations. I have seen no conversation about how they're flexing the way they used to flex back in the day of a Michael Manley and that movement. So to come back to the question, is it that we have been whipped into submission by aid, all right? Or is it that the self first has become so much the dominant currency of being that we do not have enough solidarity capital then in which to move? So then how do we use COVID as a moment to make a turn in the ship? Because I, as a futurist looking out, I do not see us moving forward in a wholesome way unless we're able to make a turn collectively. So Dr. Carol Boyce Davis has to leave at 4:30, so I'll have her say something before she goes and officially close, and then those who want to linger can linger till 5 o'clock. Dr. Davis.
Oh yeah, I was just trying to leave quietly like you leave from a party that you don't want to spoil. So I was just trying to ease out. But you know, the thing is, I think we have to look at this question of any kind of coming together from multiple angles, from the Caribbean as well as from Africa and the US. So that because of the divisions that we already had historically, we have to find ways to always move past them. And that's probably the hardest thing. But even with students at university, some of them with parents from one from the Caribbean and one from the US, you will still have them voice things that say they don't like Caribbean people. Yeah. It's like, really, you know, and so, okay, but your dad is from Jamaica, you know, so basically the questions of self-hate, which Fanon talked about, is so much part of that. So if we don't love ourselves, then we can't see how expansive we are, that we're not limited to one small national framework. And then of course, the domestic agenda that runs in the US. We were talking about Frederick Douglass recently, but Frederick Douglass was a global man as well. He wrote about Haiti, he wrote about the Caribbean emancipation and so on. But when he's taught in schools here, it's just that he is this US figure, you don't get a sense of seeing him in a global context. Mm-hmm. So how to make the local and the global come together, I think for me, is really going to be an important task that we do all the time, which this project that you're doing, Claire, is also engaged in.
All right, thank you. Before you say anything else, let me just thank all you guys who are on the panelists. We got, of course, Dr. Carol Boyce Davis, who have to leave, but we do appreciate you for what you've done, Dr. Barbara Bullard. I'm calling all you guys doctors. Dr. Jeffrey Phillips, and of course, Dr. Amanda Thomas. We do thank each and every one of you. We're gonna turn it back over to Claire. If we have questions, we can talk about it for the next half an hour or so. She said you want to hang on, but we do thank you. It's a discussion on Caribbean contributions to social justice here in the United States, and we're gonna continue this at another time, and we'll let you know the date and when. So again, we tip our hats off to all our great panelists. Thank you so much for what you have done, and Dr. Nelson, take it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, again for joining us. It was a very rich discussion. I don't want to keep people too long. I think we're going to have to do this monthly. A matter of fact, just some announcements on February 23rd, which is next Tuesday morning. Some of you will be at work, I know, but those of you who are not at work, we're going to have a session on the role of Pan-African media and Black-owned media in shaping the Pan-African worldview, and that's a project of the Pan-African Heritage World Museum that I'm on the board of. But in March, ICS will be hosting our Women in Reggae conversation, and we're trying to get some people who are in the industry to talk about, what was versus what is, and really kind of see how we can get this going. I want to thank Barbara Bullard from the Shirley Chisholm Cultural Institute, Amanda Thomas Johnson calling from London. We're really delighted to have found you. Thanks to Dr. Boyce Davis for introducing us to you. Trust me, you'll be hearing from us again, because the way you tell the story of Kwame Ture, I like to hear history taught like that. That's how I can learn history. So we'll have to have you back, maybe have a book conversation where it's just talking about books on a one-on-one basis, or maybe Donovan can also have you on his show in May when it's his birthday.
Definitely, all of them.
We're gonna have to get this work out. And Jeffrey, your poem, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Folks, we have come to the end, 4:30. If you have to go, please feel free to leave. We won't be upset, but if you can hang around and have some things to say, because ICS is getting ready to sort of prepare a survey that will go out to people on our mailing list about what we should be asking for in terms of both domestic policy and foreign policy from the Biden administration as you prepare for Caribbean American Heritage Month. And we really need to have a much more robust conversation. A lot of people are thinking, oh, well, we have a Caribbean vice president. No, we're going to get everything. It doesn't work like that.
No.
We should have learned from the Obama administration. It didn't work like that. So please, let's just wake up and understand that power does not seat itself. A Black person is seated power doesn't not mean that she or he has any real power, because they don't control a lot of the systems that actually hold the handle while they're holding the blade. So we have to be prepared to organize, create policy both at the local level and in states like Florida, where you have a whole bunch of people in office, right? Never mind that the governor is another way, but we have too many local people in government in New York and in Florida to not have a robust policy to get them going. So we want to, first of all, get a link to all the Caribbean American elected local officials. Those of you who want to support that, we're looking forward to have you work on that team. And those of you who want to work on a policy lens, we're looking for people who are wanting to work on a policy lens. So it's not just a dialogue that we're having here, that's great, but how do we use that to inform the conversations we want to have with local elected officials and the national governments as well. So with that, if you have to go, thank you. If you want to stay around a little bit longer, please feel free to do so.
Thank you. I'm going to have to shoot off. So thank you very much. Lovely to see everyone.
Give thanks.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. With pleasure. With pleasure.
Yes, sir. Anybody else on the call that want to add anything? We're here, open floor.
Well, I just want to thank you all. I'm going to be signing up. This was a pleasure to do, and to be around such brilliant panelists. And again, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Claire. Thank you all who are involved in this. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. And
Yes.
Dr. Nelson.
Yes, sir.
And others, thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I will bring some of these, just take them back to the education task force, the Diaspora Education Task Force, and extend this conversation there among the diasporan people.
Oh,
So,
actually, Dr. Boyce,
Dr. Boyce, how you doing?
Task Force, I'm glad
I'm
you're here. The Education Working Group, one of the ladies who was on the call is also involved in that. We do have an education working group that has been doing a lot of stuff on the foreign policy side, but we know also our children here are having issues. So you probably should let us have a conversation about that as well.
Oh, yeah.